Welcome to The Truth About Taxes and Retirement. This podcast is brought to you by SavingYouTaxes.com and hosted by J. Barry Watts. As an advanced tax strategist and enrolled agent federally licensed by the IRS, Barry is uniquely qualified to go deeper into the Internal Revenue Code than most accountants. He understands and interprets its provisions, explaining how they'll help you reduce income taxes you owe so you can direct that previously wasted tax money into tax-free accounts that you can enjoy in your retirement years. Now, on today's episode.
On today's episode of The Truth About Taxes and Retirement, we'll learn that there is actually more to life than taxes, money, investing, and the things we normally talk about on this show. There's a lot more, in fact. Life itself, love, romance, friendship, family, dreams, and celebration. And in honor of the upcoming 246th birthday of the United States of America on July 4th, today your host, J. Barry Watts, is celebrating America on The Truth About Taxes and Retirement.
Well, welcome to The Truth About Taxes and Retirement, sponsored by the Wealth Care Corporation. I am your host, J. Barry Watts, a tax strategist and retirement designer by day and podcast guy the rest of the time. And today we're going to take a step back from our normal conversations about the IRS and the stock market and whether or not you have enough money to retire and what's happening with inflation. No, we're not going to talk about any of that stuff today. Instead, we're gonna laugh. We might even giggle as we celebrate the birthday of America with one of the greatest comedians of all time. Now, if you're of my generation, you'll remember this guy from his appearances on The Night Court television show. And he used to appear as well on what was called The Tonight Show, but we called it in that day Johnny Carson. Hey, who's on Johnny Carson? He's got big screen movie credits. In fact, he's the guy who taught Robin Williams how to speak with a Russian accent. He has a recently minted doctorate in psychology and global leadership. So buckle your seatbelt and hold on to your sides so you don't laugh your yuck off. It's my great delight to welcome to The Truth About Taxes and Retirement, Dr. Yakov Smirnoff.
Oh, thank you. That's a great intro. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
We are so delighted to have you on the show. I know it's going to be a great time together, and we just want to hear your story. In fact, let me set it up by telling why you're on the show and why I thought to invite you to the show. Yakov plays regularly in Branson, Missouri, where he lives, and I live not far from Branson. And, you know, there's a lot of famous entertainment that comes through Branson I never see. Andy Williams was there 25 years. I never saw his show. And I thought to myself, this funny guy, I've always wanted to see him. I'm going to go to his show. So a couple of years ago, I went to Yakov's show in Branson, and I was sitting there laughing and just carrying on and enjoying it and enjoying the things that he was saying about America and the perspective he comes from, not having grown up here. And I wished my daughters could hear it. And out of that was born the idea, hey, Barry, why don't you invite Yakov on your show? So that's why I invited you to the show, is I want everybody to have the experience I had at your show down in Branson.
Well, thank you. I don't know if we'll be able to replicate what you were watching, but we can definitely talk about things that inspire me to do that kind of a show.
Well, that's what we want to hear about. So tell us your story, Yakov. How did you get from where you were to here today?
Well, a part of it was thanks to my parents and the birth process. I showed up in the Soviet Union, where my mom was a teacher, my dad was a building construction engineer, and I was unemployed at that point. I was living in a communal apartment with them. 9 families lived in one apartment, where each family occupied one room of the apartment, which is kind of a socialist heaven. 1 bathroom for 9 families, no car, no phone, things like that. But we didn't even know those were an option. So on TV, propaganda 24/7, only 2 channels. Channel 1 is propaganda. Channel 2, a KGB officer tells you turn back to channel 1. So those were the good old days, And we lived like that till I was 26 years old. And started actually doing comedy when I was 15. And it's kind of hard for Americans to picture Russian comedian because, it sounds like contradiction, sounds like Amish electrician. You don't hear much about those
Probably
guys.
not.
Right?
No.
No. So because they don't have a union, and we had a big Soviet Union, so it was what it was. We had the Department of Jokes that was part of Ministry of Culture that would censor your material once a year.
Wait, are you
And
serious? Was there really a Department of Jokes?
yes,
So that's not just a joke.
No, and Department of Songs, Department of Dance, Department of, everything was controlled. Not joking. I wish I was. But I was controlled by the bureaucrats who would tell you what's funny, what's not funny, or what they think the people should listen to or not, And so that was just reality. Nobody questioned it. Questioning it we knew what the consequences would be. So it was kind of bred into us with our mother's milk. That just shut up and sit down and be quiet and do what they tell you to do. And that's what we did till I started working as a comedian on the cruise ships on the Black Sea. And that's where I met tourists. A lot of them were from United States, but a lot of also were from Europe. And they were totally different. I couldn't pinpoint what it was. But, the best way, they just were careless. They were free. They were and carrying on and dancing. And the Russians were just sitting there watching them because they were afraid that if they do something wrong, they'll get in trouble. So that was a contrast that I was lucky to see, and saw that spark of freedom in their eyes that I so wanted to get that. And I never seen it before. And so that's what started our journey to America, by just wanting to experience that.
So were you doing comedy on those cruise ships?
I was doing kind of master of ceremonies / comedy. Yes.
And now the Black Sea is totally Russian controlled. Is that correct?
At that time, yes. At that time, now it borders with like Georgia and, well, let's see. But at that time, those cruise ships were totally Soviet, under Soviet flag, and everything was under on the Soviet government control.
So even on the ship, you had to be careful about what you said.
Oh, yes, very much so. And it was, you were given a script that that fit their narrative, and you were pretty much repeating that without improvising. Would be very dangerous.
Yakov, Patrice here. On the
Yeah.
cruise ships, did the foreign passengers laugh at your material?
It's a great question. They did more because what I knew that I had different people from different countries, and I had a privilege to have interpreters for all of these groups. And then I would organize things that were more visual, physically, like contests, like a Miss Cruise contest, where they would have to, with the instructions of what I wanted them to do, they would just compete with one another. So if there was like 5 different groups, they were competing with one another. So the humor, which was actually a very big moment in my life, where my mom was very much against going to America. That was like, for 20 years, my dad was trying to convince her, we need to get out. And she was, no. because she was concerned that I will not be able to make it in the United States. And I was the only child. And I didn't speak English, and we didn't have much money. We didn't know anybody. So she was concerned about that. But when she saw me, I invited them on a cruise one day, and she saw me performing in front of that international audience, and they were falling over laughing, because not because they understood my language, but they could understand my facial expressions, my timing, and it was good enough for her to see, oh, wait, maybe there is something there.
That's a great story, Barry.
So Yakov, when did you first know you were funny?
In school, when I would get in trouble regularly by doing, making fun of teachers. We had teachers who were pretty mean. And I remember one time this teacher said to the class, anybody who's not smart, stand up. And I stood up. And he said, Yakov, you're pretty smart. I said, yeah, but I didn't want you to be the only one standing. That was not smart at all. However, my classmates all bent over laughing, and I knew that I had something, and it was addicting almost. I wanted to hear that laughter, so I would get in trouble more and more and more as I was getting older. And one time, I was probably about, I want to say maybe 13, maybe something like that. And I got in trouble. And, the routine was when you walk into principal's office, they ask you, who is your father? And you're supposed to say, my father is Soviet Union. And who is your mother? And you're supposed to say, my mother is Communist Party. And then a routine is like, whom do you want to be? And you're supposed to tell them, like, I want to be a teacher, a farmer, a bus driver, whatever. And they asked me, who's your father? And I said, my father is Soviet Union. And who's your mother? I said, my mother is Communist Party. They said, whom do you want to be? I said, I want to be an orphan.
Okay, now that was good.
That was good.
And what happened? What happened?
Magic happened. My principal laughed. Which, because he wanted to be an orphan too, but he didn't really have a choice. So that really gave me, if I was thinking, if I can make him laugh, then maybe I can make people laugh professionally.
So one of the dangers to an interview like this, though, is we don't know when you're going for the joke and when you're telling truth in the story. Were you really supposed to answer that my father's?
Yeah.
Really?
This was a normal, you see, Americans and Canadians, we are not there yet, but we're heading that way very, very fast. That this becomes norm. The narrative of the government becomes norm to whatever they want to do. They want to censor you with the Department of Jokes. They do that. People don't own guns. People don't have jury trials. None of that existed. None of that was there. So they could do whatever they want to, whatever the rules they wanted to have, they do it.
So when your principal laughed, you knew you'd made him laugh.
Yes.
What happens after that? Is he just pat you on the head and tell you to go to class, or
get out of here? Yeah, get out of here and stuff. But I knew that I had a potential that when I risk and I win, and that's kind of was the mode of intelligent comedians, that we were finding material that would get under the radar from the censors, but the audience would get it. They would understand it. And so it was kind of risky, but it was, if they said, no, you're not doing that joke, then you don't. But if they didn't catch it, then you were good for a year to use that joke.
Did you ever do a joke that you got in trouble for after the fact?
No, I was pretty smart to avoid those.
You're still here, so no, you didn't.
I'm here. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
here.
So I think you said you first started doing comedy at 15. What was your first gig? How do you get started in that?
There was a lot of different government. Again, everything is controlled by the government. So, but like my mom was a teacher, so there was a club for teachers union. And kids of teachers, if they wanted to, they would participate in some celebrations like May 1st or Day of Victory or Revolution Day, something like that. And we would put on like some amateur productions, and they had a assigned person there who would stage those things, and they were mostly patriotic, kind of a rah-rah Communist Party, rah-rah the Soviet Union, stuff like that. But there was spots where you could do some comedy, and there was a couple of comedians that were pretty famous there in the Soviet Union because they were clever. They were able to still kind of make light fun of the communist or the regime or whatever we were dealing with, shortages of stuff, but they were not criticizing. They were just making a little fun. And they were censored as well by the same Department of Jokes. And they would be on the radio every Sunday. There was a state-run radio that was in every house, and you could not turn it off. It was just on. You can make it quieter, but you couldn't turn it off. And so, but on Sunday morning, that guy, Arkady Rykin was his name. He was kind of a standard comedian. And boy, did I had a big tape recorder, and I would record his stuff and I would memorize it next day. I would have the whole routine. And there was no such thing as like people had, like the material was not proprietary.
Yes.
Nobody even knew what that meant, so people were just using it as jokes. So they heard it and they would tell it, and nobody was like saying, wait, that's not your routine, that's Arkady Rykin's routine. Nobody apologized, nobody did anything, So I was given that wonderful gift to use his material and go on stage in front of 100 people, 200 people, and do that a couple of times a year.
So just so I understand, you're telling me that there was essentially a radio, a device in every Russian home that was not controlled in the home, but is controlled by the state. And when the state wants to make an announcement to you, they punch the button and they talk into your house no matter what's going on there.
Pretty much, kind of like on a cruise ship. Yeah, if the captain needs to make an announcement, you're going to hear it. Yeah.
You do know that stuff just blows our mind, and we're like, yeah, it's not possible. I can't even imagine how that works.
Oh no, don't you and I are still of the age that we might see some of that in the United States, unfortunately.
Well,
How so?
Well, I mean, if you think about what's happening right now with the speech being controlled by a fairly small group of people, whatever that is, and you can get canceled. What do you think that was? In the Soviet Union, when you were canceled, you were gone, you were done. Here, you just don't, social media treats you like, whatever they think you are, and you have no way to fight it. And that's unheard of. Like only 10 years ago or 20 years ago, there was be like, what are you talking about? that the president of the United States would be kicked off Twitter because someone wanted him to be kicked off. I mean, that's pretty extreme, don't you think?
I certainly think it is. And I know a comedian in Branson who apparently is kicked off Twitter. You don't have a Twitter account. It says it's suspended.
Is it really?
Yeah, when you look, so when I go to your website and I click on your Twitter icon at the bottom, it takes me to an account that says this account is suspended.
You kidding? And I'm not even posting anything.
Well, yeah, I'm telling you, that's what happened yesterday. So
wow, I'm gonna check into that. But so there you go. There is your example. I'll give you another example. I was doing a show in Florida, and the promoter said that he wanted to buy some advertising for my show. And the show was called Make America Laugh Again. Okay. They said, we can't advertise that. That's too political. And
What?
then they said, yes, I'm not joking. And then this is how crazy it is. And then he said, well, can we just advertise it as Yakov Smirnoff show? And they said, we don't advertise alcohol either.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
This was like a year and a half, 2 years ago.
So,
weird.
Again, we're asking the question, is that a part of the joke or is that really the story? Would they really not use your name because they didn't know?
That's correct. No, it's not a joke.
See, what I like about this and what I hope my daughters hear in the podcast when they listen to it, even if no one else does, is I just want them to be aware of the freedoms we enjoy that make us say stories like that are just ridiculously absurd. It's not even possible it could be that way. And yet we have testimony from people who've walked the walk, even recently in America.
Yes.
And I think that is just incredible. And people need to be aware of that. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted you on the show. So you left a repressive Soviet Union to come to the United States when you were 26. Is that right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And tell us about how did you make the decision? How did you get here? How were you received when you got here? All those kinds of things.
Oh, we can talk for a long time on this. I mean, it was a very difficult decision because we did not. The information was totally censored in whatever we were getting in the Soviet Union, information-wise, about America was all negative. There was nothing good about it. So they would just show you the mob, they show you the gangs, they show you the stock market that people would kill each other. I mean, it was just weird perspective on America. So whatever negative things they could find, they would do that. And so living like that 26 years, if I didn't see the spark of freedom in Americans or other countries, people eyes, I would probably not have enough guts to make that decision, because all the information, and this is, okay, I'll tell you, so I was a comedian, right? So I would perform only on the times when the cruise line, normally they would lease their ships to European countries or American or somewhere. So they would make dollars, they would release them, and they would send the crew with the ship. So like the band, the captain, the upper officers, they were part of that deal. But the people like myself who were disposable, or, you know, we were told to get off the ship when they leave the country. So I never left the Soviet Union prior to leaving. So I remember going to Kiev at that time because a friend of mine who was a leader of the band, he would go abroad, and they continually brainwashed them on those ships. Even if they left the ship to go shopping or whatever, they would still show them how superior Russia or Soviet Union is, because, and whatever they were using, it was working, because when I went to his house, apartment, and I said, listen, I can't remember the name. I think it was Yuri, but maybe some, I don't remember. And I said, can tell me the truth. Are those people, are they weird? Are they like, will I be able to make them laugh there in America? You know, he literally, I'm not joking, he put a pillow on the telephone. He said, let's go for a walk. We can't talk here. So we went for a walk, and he tells me everything that television is pretty much was telling me all this time. Totally brainwashed. No way. I said, but do they have comedians at least? And said, yes, they do. But, and are they funny? What are they doing? And he was saying, listen, you would be an idiot to go to that country. So that was just one example of what we had to go through just to make a decision to get out. And then once we made the decision, then it was like, how do we survive? Because the Soviet government was doing everything to discourage people to leave. But they needed wheat from America. And Jimmy Carter told them, you know, we'll give you wheat if you allow people out. So they were doing roadblocks on their side of how to prevent people leaving. So one of the roadblocks was, if a young person wants to leave, they have to take the old people with him, because we don't want to, the state does not want to take care of them, which worked for us. But most of older people didn't want to leave, were scared to leave. So then they would just stay, or they would make you get 5 reference letters from, or all the different places that you used to work at. They have to, the boss would have to write you a letter that you're a good person. And they didn't want to write that letter because we were traitors. We were like terrible for the country. So the whole thing was horrific. And then a funny story now, you'll think this is a joke, but we needed to survive because we knew Americans are not going to let us in right away. So they put us in some other country, in our case, in Italy, so they can do a security check, whatever. And so we needed money to survive, and they would only allow us to have $100 per person to take with us, and everything else stayed back. And 2 suitcases a person, and with very specific items that were allowed to take out. So we bought, you know, those Matryoshka dolls that we could sell, a couple of Russian hats, things like that. But then we heard through the grapevine, this will sound like a joke, but it was true, that there is one item that very valuable in Italy that you can sell, and they're very cheap in the Soviet Union, and it was condoms. And this is
okay. Well, it takes me a minute to think through that, but I'm getting with you. Okay, I understand.
Condoms were 1 penny, like equivalent in the Soviet Union, and $1 in Italy. Talk about bang for your buck, right? or a buck for your bang. But this was true. This was true. So, and there was no limit on those. You could get as many as you want. I mean, there was no limit, right?
So you took 2 suitcases full of condoms?
One suitcase, and put it in my mom's suitcase, you know, because we assume that people will not ask her, why do you need that?
Yes.
You know. So we brought them to Italy, and we literally, like, first weekend, there was an open market, and we brought that suitcase, and my parents, who never been like capitalists or never knew about it, they became like really good at this. So mom, was so funny. Dad would be in charge of advertising. So he was making balloon animals out of those things. And mom would hold up this is crazy. She translated into Italian a phrase that, and when a man would pass by, she would hold up the condom and she would point at me and she would say, if you don't want kids like that, buy a condom.
So you were part of the advertising campaign.
I was. And they would laugh immediately and they would buy it. So that's how we kind of survived on that.
What a great introduction to your parents to capitalism.
Absolutely.
Buying them for a penny, selling them for $1. I'd buy a train carload of those today.
That's why I'm on your show, you see, because you wanted people to know how to make it through their retirement age. Just buy condoms and go to Italy, right?
Okay, well, just in case anyone from the SEC is listening, that is not exactly the investment advice that we're giving here today. So you got to America, you did a lot of television. What were some of the highlights of that? And take us through your connections to presidents, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I didn't speak English when I got here. So first I had to learn the language. I decided to become a bartender because on the cruise ships, the bartenders were in the same room where I was performing, only they were on the other side, the bar was. So I kind of figured that would give me a chance to make a living and also learn the language. So, which is what I did. And did little by little start telling jokes to my customers. And depending on how much tips I would get, I would know if I was funny or not. And that kind of got me to the next place where I went to Hollywood and auditioned at the Comedy Store, which was a mecca of comedy then and still today. And the owner of the Comedy Store liked what I was doing, even though my English was very broken, but she thought I was unique. There was no Russian comedian at that time, And so she suggested that I stay there. And that guided me to, Robin Williams was performing there on a regular basis. When he got the movie Moscow on the Hudson, he brought Paul Mazursky, who was the director producer, to see me. And that's when he gave me a break. And I was working with Robin and helping him to kind of stay on track with because he wanted to do a movie in Russian. So they kept me there for a while to do that with him. So, and then got a movie of Money Pit. I think the next one was Money Pit with Tom Hanks. And then a movie was Richard Pryor, Brewster's Millions. And then movie was Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson called Heartburn. And that was it was happening pretty fast. I thought it was just because I was so talented, but really it had to do a lot with the tension that was between the Soviet Union and the United States. And I was releasing that tension on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson or Night Court or other places. And then I got invited to the White House, which was kind of, I was a little nervous because they called and they said, would like you to go to Washington to perform in front of the Bushes. and I said, that will get me arrested. But George Bush Sr. was a vice president for President Reagan at that time. So I went and met President Reagan, and we hit it off like immediately. because he loved the jokes, Russian jokes, and he was very much, he knew a lot of them, but he wanted more and more and more. So I was like a supplier for his addiction to Russian
So
humor.
you were like Ronald Reagan's dealer.
Kind of. Again, if FCC is watching it, this is not the advice we're giving.
And past performance is no promise of future expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
So you worked for presidents, you provided material to Reagan, and then one day you land in a little bitty resort town in Southwest Missouri called Branson. How did you get to Branson, Missouri?
I didn't want to go to Branson. I didn't even, I was snobby, like everybody who lived in Malibu. And I just thought that, Midwest was just a land that you fly over to get to New York. So I really was kind of, I was kicking and screaming that I didn't want to go. But what happened is the Soviet Union collapsed. And on the night of the collapse, David Letterman had a top 10 list of things that will now change. And I made number 1 on the list. Yakov Smirnoff will be out of work. And I thought it was funny, but 6 months later, it wasn't. None of my contracts in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, Reno, Tahoe were renewed. So I started literally looking for a place where they did not know that the Soviet Union collapsed. And that's how I landed in Branson. And they still don't know, by the way. And I'm not about to tell them.
So you live in Branson, Missouri, and perform out of there. Tell us about your show and when you're there and how people get tickets to your show and things of that nature.
Please, yes, come see. For tickets, they can get on yakov.com, which is yakov.com. I only do 21 shows in my theater in October and November. So if you go online, you can buy tickets. I'd love for you to come and see the show. It's an experience. It's a journey that I'm taking you on to, even though with all the negative things that I see coming on into horizon in the United States, I travel the world, I go everywhere, and I still love this country. And I think being in the middle of the country is wonderful. My wife and I just bought a house in Branson. Prior to that, we weren't sure because we lived between Malibu and Missouri. And then we said, after COVID hit, we said, let them have it, and we left and bought a house here, and very happy to be here. So I think you will enjoy the experience. I think you will walk out inspired, even though we need to be watchful so we don't end up like the Soviet Union. We need to be careful, but it's still a greatest place on earth.
Well, one of the reasons it's the greatest place on earth is because of the people who've come here from around the world.
That's right.
To celebrate what's rich in the United States. And I'll even go so far as to say what's rich about the Missouri Ozarks and rich about Branson, Missouri.
Yes. Yes.
We love this part of the country, and we invite you to come. Just leave your liberal politics somewhere else if you don't mind. It's truly a wonderful part of the world, and part of what makes it wonderful are people like Yakov Smirnoff, who performs in Branson regularly. So hopefully you'll get a chance to see him on the show down there. It's been a great time having you on our show today. Thank you for being our best guest. How about that?
Our best. Oh, I like that. And I just want to mention last thing that I don't do any really political humor in my show. So whether you're liberal or a conservative, you will still enjoy it. I promise you that. And the show for this year, it's called United We'll Laugh.
Very good. Well, I bet we will laugh if Yakov Smirnoff is at the helm.
And Barry, may I please ask that we get Yakov back again to talk about laughing?
Wouldn't it be cool if we could we'll make this our annual 4th of July show. We'll always have Yakov come back and tell us about new things. This has been a great time today. Yakov, maybe we'll connect up and see if we can do this again next year. It was wonderful having you as our guest today.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I appreciate you. And I'm working on a podcast myself. So maybe there is something Canadians can do for me as well.
I'll be happy to introduce you to the folks who can make that happen.
All right.
Well, that's it for this edition of The Truth About Taxes and Retirement. You've been listening to Yakov Smirnoff as we celebrate America. We talk about money and taxes, negatively about taxes for good reason here, but we talk about those kinds of things all the time. And I wanted this show to just be an opportunity for us to celebrate the fact that we live in a country where we can talk freely, at least still at this point, about whatever we want to. And a place where we have the opportunity to retire that doesn't exist everywhere else, and a place where we still have the opportunity to be whatever we want to be. And a poor kid who is having to sell condoms on the street to make a living can come to America and find his pot of gold at the end of the red, white, and blue rainbow. Thanks so much for listening to our show. Until next time, this is Barry Watts on The Truth About Taxes and Retirement.
Thank you for listening to The Truth About Taxes and Retirement podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of SavingYouTaxes.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional tax and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your own qualified advisor with any questions you may have regarding taxes and investing.